thing is, by giving access to these like forward deployed engineers, you're giving Anthropic and OpenAI direct insight into what the challenges and workflows of your business, and you're giving away your secret sauce in a sense, right? When you use OpenAI, you're basically helping them train GPT-6, GPT-7 that will eventually take away your business.
Welcome to Interlude, where we discuss the transition between the pre and post AI world. Today, for episode 1, we're discussing AI in production at YC startups. Today we have Jake, who is my co-founder. I'm gonna be interviewing you. Jake has previous experience working as an AI engineer at CloudCruise, and he was their first engineer. He has experience working at big tech like Microsoft and Cognitive. So he has wealth of experience deploying AI in production. Jake, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Tell me a little bit about CloudCruise and what they did.
Yeah. Thanks for the introduction. So like Vatsal said, I started my career out at Microsoft, primarily working under the Office umbrella, so Office products. Then I moved to Cognitive, which was kind of an ad tech company. They served ads on behalf of companies. And most recently, I was part of CloudCruise. So CloudCruise was a browser automation startup for healthcare, back office healthcare operations. That pretty much sums up my background.
All right. So what did CloudCruise do as a company?
CloudCruise as a company, they primarily served revenue cycle management companies, which is essentially trying to get more money from insurance companies.
Okay.
But CloudCruise specifically, we automated anything you can do in a browser itself. So any clicks or any typing that you did, we created an agent that was able to do that. And anything you can automate, like you want to book a flight on United to San Francisco, you just say, hey, book me a flight to San Francisco. It would create that automation, and then you can use that over and over again.
So how are you all different from browser-based?
Yeah, browser-based is relied more on LLMs and was a little bit more self-serve. They provided the infrastructure for the browser agents, whereas we were more, at least at the time, a little bit more hands-on with the customers. So we helped build their automations, and then we handed it off to them through an API to be called later.
Okay, so if I had a website that I wanted to do automation on a regular basis, I would come to you guys and you guys would give me white glove service to get that automation in place. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we took a more deterministic approach. We tried to just only use static selectors on the web pages, and only used LLMs as necessary for things like recovering the browser agent on errors, which is actually what I worked on.
All right, tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I worked on the self-recovering portion of our browser agent. So whenever the browser agent encountered an error, maybe that's an unexpected pop-up, or it just a button moved on the page and it needed to figure out where that button went, it went into an error recovery flow. So it actually called another agent, the one I worked on, to first take all the inputs, things like error message, state of the browser page, the current instruction that the browser agent took, use that to classify the type of error, and then figure it out based on the state of the page, how to recover from that error. So say it's the pop-up, the recovery would be just to close the pop-up and resume the workflow.
Okay, so let me reframe that. So if there were any issues during the browser automation workflow, then if there were any errors happened, you developed a model to fix those errors and keep going?
Yeah. I didn't develop the model per se. It was a multi-step agent. So it took in the inputs, tried to figure out the right set of actions based off of some reasoning step, and then it executed those actions, typically a AI agent would.
Okay, so I imagine you made a bunch of changes to the code base to ensure that error recovery on browser automation happens smoothly. How do you know if the system or this AI was actually working for people in production? Would you just interview them and ask them? How do you know? For example, if I had a browser workflow that I wanted automated, right, and you helped me automate that browser workflow, right, how would I know whether your error recovery piece is working well or whether the browser automation is working well?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we heavily relied on evaluations. And because LLMs are non-deterministic, which means that every time they output something, it's going to be different.
Define evaluations for me.
Yeah, evaluations it's a way to test whether your AI works or not, kind of answering the previous question, but at its core, it's you define an input and an expected output, so what the LLM should output, and then you test whatever LLM that you're trying to implement against that input and expected output and see if it matches. So it's like a unit test. You're looking for a specific output, just the output in this case can be like a text prompt or a number or some other it can be literally anything.
So tell me how the offline evaluations worked for you at CloudCruise.
So this was, I would say the offline evaluations was the majority of the work in implementing this agent, rather than stringing together the LLM calls, the tools, and the reasoning. It was 90% of my time went into evaluations. And
Walk me through your day.
So I guess there's two steps here. One is before we had the evaluation set, and one is after. Before, most of the time you're trying to figure out what to even evaluate on. What is the metric that you need to optimize for, so that your agent is performing well. So in our case, it's a percentage of errors recovered, right? I would literally watch our replays of the browser session and see what type of errors actually were encountered. I would literally go through each error one by one manually and watch the recording of the browser being stepped through by the agent and see where it erred. And then I'd look through and create a classification of the different types of errors. And then that way I would know in my evaluations, on unexpected pop-ups, what is the percentage that we can recover on? On cases where the UI has changed, right? A button has moved, what are the percentages? So I had to classify and come up with the business metrics in which I was even creating the evaluations.
So you would be manually building the evaluations data set?
Yes, in the beginning.
You know what's funny? I heard a very similar thing from an AI engineer that I was talking to at Listen Labs.
Yeah.
And turns out this is a big problem, and a lot of engineers out there are building their evaluations themselves, and it's a very manual process.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, humans have the judgment to know whether or not something is good or bad. And in this case, it's when you're building the first iteration of the evaluation set, you have to make the judgments is this something that is valuable to my business to try to automate using AI, right? In our case, it's we need to be able to recover from these automations, because if we don't, then the customer has to either resubmit the whatever API call that we're doing, or we have to go and manually fix it. So it saves a lot of human hours.
So let's talk through how one row in this evaluation data set that you would create looks like. Yeah. Could you?
So I chose to create an eval set for each LLM call that we had.
Okay.
So we might have had 7 to 10, I forget. But
what's an example LLM call for error recovery on browser agents?
Yeah. So the very first step in this could literally just be, hey, take in all of the input. Say it's a screenshot of the time in which the browser agent erred, and see if you can immediately classify anything wrong with the browser state. So if it's literally say, I don't know, the 503 service unavailable, if that's the screenshot of the page, then the input into the LLM would be what's wrong with this page? And then the LLM would say, oh, there's a 503, the web page is down. That is a classification of an error that can happen.
So the input and the output of the LLM would make up the row each row in the evaluations data set.
Yes.
And could you explain, for the sake of the audience, how you would run these evaluations, or how you would use these evaluations?
Yeah, I would pretty much just run them using a coding agent, be hey, I have this evaluation that we use LangFuse, but we stored it in their service, and then I would just say hey, for this specific data set item or eval set item, run my agent against that and see what it outputs. And then you would have some scoring that can be did it output the classification that I wanted, or if it's more non-verifiable, then you could use an LLM as a judge. Non-verifiable meaning there's no right answer to it. And you might see these typically in customer support or more natural language queries where the answer is a wall of text, right?
So you would have the LLM input and output in the evaluation. Then you would have an actual LLM with that input try to give you an output, and then you would see how close the outputs were.
Yeah, for my case, because it was right or wrong,
yes.
I knew the answer to it and it was clear yes or no, I would just score it based off of that. So 0 would be it's wrong, 1 it would be it's right, and that's how I calculated accuracy.
Okay, so you would just try to get the binary response from the LLM.
Yes.
Okay.
To clarify, the response wasn't binary, but whether or not it was right or wrong is.
Okay.
So the response could be bad UI, unexpected pop-up, or a page was down. It's a choice in one of the classifications that I created.
Okay, I see. So in your eval set, you had LLM input, and you had one of those classifications as the output.
Yeah.
And then you had an actual LLM with that input try to predict what that classification would be. Maybe a pop-up happened, and that's what the LLM said it would. And if the classifications match, then you had a score of 1, which is great. Otherwise 0, and that's how you were able to test how good different LLMs were for your specific use case.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. how important are these sorts of evaluations specifically for the end business metric that you're trying to move?
Yeah, I think they're incredibly important because that is entirely how you know whether or not your AI is working or not. If you go, some people say like, vibe coding, there's also vibe evals where you're just watching the agent do something in production and seeing if it works or not. You watch it a couple of times and you're like, oh, it looks good to go. But there's so many edge cases in production that you need a good evaluation set in the first place to, quantify it.
I'm sorry. This was more of a feeder question, but actually what I was trying to understand is how do you know, like you created these offline evals, right? And they're based on your judgments of what went wrong. And sure, you as a human being know when a pop-up happened or not.
Yeah.
After this whole process of evaluation, right? Now you've deployed your browser automations in the wild. How do you test that? Like, how do you test whether your error recovery tool online was working, or did you not have a way of testing? And offline evaluations is what you were mostly relying on.
Oh, were you asking me like offline versus online evals?
Yes.
Yeah, online is it's a tricky beast. I mean, you can, a lot of people do things like A/B testing in the wild. But for us, yes, our feedback loop is essentially if it fails in production, it flags that failure for manual review. In this case, I made a customized dashboard so it's a little bit easier. Okay. And then I choose whether or not to add that to my evaluation set. And then like maybe once a week, I would try to like fix the like prompt issues, tool issues, like context issues of the agent.
So did you see that your rate of failure went down on your custom dashboard, after you integrate all these offline evaluations and chose the best LLMs? I imagine you built these offline evaluations to choose the best LLM to use. And then once you chose the best LLMs and the harness around it, then, did you actually see impact in errors that people saw online?
Yeah, of course. A lot of the errors that the evaluations were testing for, like they pretty much were fixed. What ended up happening is that because you fixed the some set of issues, what you see in production, the distribution of errors actually changes, and because of like the behavior of the model that you just pushed, like changes as well. So I mean, there's a term called distribution shift for that, but essentially like they would just be new edge cases that come up, and then I would have to fix those, and it's like this vicious cycle. Yeah.
Okay. So I threw out the term harness in my last question. Maybe tell us about when to fine-tune a model versus when to harness engineer, because browser automation is something that's so custom. Maybe the models that are out there right now aren't that good at just be doing computer use and doing browser automations. So did you guys fine-tune your own model? And maybe you can also just like quickly go over what fine-tuning is and what harness engineering is. Let's start with that.
Yeah. So harness engineering is everything around the LLM. It's the tools, the prompts, the memory, the context. It's everything. It's the the harness in a sense in which the model is working with. Fine-tuning is when you take a typically an open source model, one that's like available to everybody. Like GLM 5.2 is a good example of this, like GPT-OSS like 120B. You take that model and then you fine-tune it, or you run some algorithm in which you shape the model to behave at better at a specific task that you have in mind using data that you brought. And there's a lot of algorithms for it. But in terms of when you should fine-tune versus like invest on harness engineering, I certainly think you should squeeze as much juice out of the harness in a sense as you can. Like especially when you're going from like 0 to 1, like you should only be working with the harness because you're trying to figure out again like what metric you're optimizing for and what metrics that are important to your business. And the harness and like OpenAI and Anthropic's models can get you to like 95% of the way there. In terms of fine-tuning, I think that when you've reached this limit with the foundation models and then you have a pretty good harness in place, you have some metric that you're optimizing for, and every percentage increase of performance for those metrics is a huge like gain for you, then I think you should explore fine-tuning, because fine-tuning has its drawbacks. It can be expensive. It requires some level of expertise to do it. And so really it's only when it makes sense in terms of like your business should you fine tune. Obviously there are other use cases for like owning your AI that's very helpful, but fine tuning again, like work on your harness first and then fine tune.
That sounds reasonable to me, but you didn't answer my question. Did you fine-tune did you have fine-tuned models at CloudCruise, or was it mostly harness engineering?
We did not fine-tune our models yet, but we are definitely reaching like the peak performance of like computer use models from Anthropic, Google. Like they're very slow. Like there will be a day when they would have to fine-tune. Yes.
Is it allowed for you, or could you share with us what frontier models you did use? Given you didn't fine-tune models, I imagine you used models either using OpenRouter or directly OpenAI models or Claude models. Is that something you can share with us?
Yeah, honestly, truthfully, I swapped between like Claude and OpenAI quite a bit, and sometimes mix the models, throw in Gemini in there. Because with the evaluations, you can test which models like perform the best on your metrics, right? Because you have that repeatable test. So we use them all, honestly, whichever one was the best at the evals.
How frequently would you switch them out?
Not that frequently. I would say like every few months. When there's a new model release, like we would try it. Obviously, we'd have to like change the prompts and change the like harness a little bit to be better suited for the models, but it wasn't as frequent as you would think.
So you try it on your evaluation that you created.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you use OpenRouter or Fireworks, or did you like directly call their APIs? I'm just curious.
We just directly call their APIs.
Okay.
OpenRouter charges a markup.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned the term owning your AI. Tell me more about what owning your AI would mean for enterprises today.
Yeah, so typically in regulated industries, healthcare, finance, we operated in healthcare, so that means we had to be HIPAA compliant. It's just some regulation in the US that we have to adhere to. But these companies, they don't want to expose like the data to and give that to like OpenAI and Anthropic, and they want to feel more secure in knowing that their data lives all within their like company, right? Some people may even want their data to be on their own data centers. So owning your own AI is that with these open source models, like again like GLM or Quen, you can host them on your own GPUs within your own like AWS like VPC or whatever, virtual private cloud, and in that sense, like all data that passes through these models, like only is in your servers. Like no other company will see it, and there's no risk of exposing that data. So that's the first part of owning your AI. And when you own your AI, you can like fine tune it again to make that performance of those models even better. So it's in a sense also a way to like have an edge against your competitors, because everybody has access to OpenAI and Anthropic. And if you own your own AI and own your own models and like fine tune on top of that with your own data, then that model becomes very good at what you do as a business, and no other company will have access to that intelligence.
That makes sense. So do you think that regulated industries like healthcare, I guess banking as well, have been owning their AI recently? What have you seen?
I've seen actually a big push in law specifically with companies like Harvey, Crosby seems to be another company.
And Legora.
Yeah, Legora. Yeah. Healthcare is a little tricky because it's so regulated, it may lag. I know companies like Ensemble Health, they're a revenue cycle management company. They've been partnering with, I think, Cohere, maybe some other company, but
yeah, just qualify revenue cycle management for the audience really quick.
It's trying to get as much money from insurance companies as possible, basically.
Yeah, for context, because the American healthcare system has insurance companies and healthcare companies, right. And healthcare companies are always trying to get money from the insurance companies for procedures for their patients.
Exactly. Yeah. It's billions of dollars in that business, if not trillions.
Okay. All right. Tell me a bit about your future takes. What are your views on post-training, fine-tuning? What do you think the future will look like? Will it be, OpenAI and Anthropic are like a big duopoly, or do you see, a different sort of future?
Yeah. I think in terms of OpenAI versus Anthropic, I think this is actually quite a dangerous scenario for companies that continually use them as a provider, because when you use OpenAI, you're sending them the traffic of your, what you do as a business, all your workflows, and everything, right? And if OpenAI and Anthropic have started their forward deployed companies or programs where they embed their engineers within enterprises to use, their APIs or the models to automate a lot of their workflows. But the thing is, by giving access to these forward deployed engineers, you're giving Anthropic and OpenAI direct insight into what the challenges and workflows of your business, and you're giving away your secret sauce in a sense, right?
Yeah. So I am building the company Whitney AI with you, and we're trying to post-train models for folks. So we are going directly against, I guess, OpenAI deployment company, Anthropic deployment company. Yeah. So it's against my, I guess. It's something I'm curious about, and I do want to get your actual thoughts on. I would like to push back actually on what you just said. I think OpenAI and Anthropic could very well do contracts with people, and in the contract they could say, "Oh, we promise not to post-train on your data." So they could do that. In that case, how is it dangerous for healthcare companies or law companies to work with them? Because it's in the contract. OpenAI won't be able to train on their data, and they still get OpenAI engineers to help post-train models for them.
But the knowledge will always live inside of those engineers, right? The engineers, no matter what, you can say I'm not going to use your data, or I'm not going to use your exact workflow to train the new level of GPT 5.6 or 7. Right? Yeah. But those engineers will have seen those workflows. They know what the problems are, so that they can probably create synthetic data or get public data and use that to increase the level of intelligence. So you're giving away you're basically using, when you use OpenAI, you're basically helping them train GPT-6, GPT-7. That will eventually take away your business.
Okay, that's fair. My view on the situation is that it's possible. Yeah, it's possible. They do give away information like that. It's possible they don't, but we do need a lot of other post-training shops to be out there for there to be a perfectly competitive economy, just for the betterment of the world in general. Because a duopoly with OpenAI and Anthropic as the winners will just lead to price hikes. And I don't think it's good for society in general. So that was my take on the situation, just in case you were curious.
Yeah, and I would say there are, of course, caveats to it, because there are markets where OpenAI and Anthropic just cannot serve, right? Regulated industries that require owning their AI is one, because Anthropic and OpenAI have closed source models, which means no one in the public will have access to the actual weights of those models. You can't deploy that in your own GPU. And so that might disqualify a lot of potential customers.
But they can go into those companies and say, we'll deploy our models on your GPUs, or like you said, in an AWS VPC.
But then they give away the weights.
Oh, I'm actually not sure about this, but this is an interesting point. So they actually cannot do that?
Yeah, because you would have to deploy the model weights onto the GPU. You would have give access, in a sense, to that customer.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. And what do you think about, I guess, the future of browser automation? Who do you think, will be the winners? What do you think about, browser-based model versus how CloudCruise is doing? Mm-hmm. What are other people in the space?
I would say browser-based and CloudCruise are serving two different markets. And there's a lot of people popping up in this space as well. A lot of YC startups I've seen are direct CloudCruise competitors, or other competitors as well. I think this space, again, it's two different markets. One is more agentic browser agents, where you can just prompt and then it'll do something. But the issue there is that the reliability may not be the best, because it's doing these LLM calls every single time, and that's also slow. CloudCruise has a different approach, and they've also verticalized as a company. So they're only tackling healthcare workflows right now. Mm-hmm. So it might not make sense for other browser agent companies to try to compete with them in healthcare. But anyways, I digress. I think where this industry is heading is, I think there will be a world, it keeps evolving. A lot of knowledge is hidden behind logins, for example. And logins, username, password logins. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the next step in browser agents, is trying to get access to information behind login portals. And it's a bit tricky, because you have password management, you have bot detection, so many different issues.
I misheard you. I heard logits. I'm thinking of machine learning too much.
No worries, yeah.
Okay, that's fairly interesting, but my follow-up question to that is, why wouldn't Anthropic's computer use model, if extrapolated, and if it becomes much better in the future, why wouldn't that just take over the browser automation business completely? And now people can just directly call Anthropic computer use model and automate their own workflows.
Yeah, it may reach a point, but today those computer use models are very, very slow. The latency is so bad that it's unusable, and the accuracy is still not great, especially in long running workflows. And so some of the workflows that CloudCruise automated were almost an hour long.
So you did it better than Anthropic could do it?
We took a different approach, right? Mm-hmm. Again, ours was more deterministic, so we don't rely on LLM calls. That's why we can do such long-running workflows.
But you do LLM calls for your error.
Yeah, recovery. But for the actual steps, we don't rely on them. If you're trying to click a button in the portal,
I see.
That is not an LLM call.
So the actual steps are deterministic. That's what allows you low latency. But in case there are errors, you do use LLMs, and that's the error detection framework that you worked on.
Yes. All right. It's much cheaper that way too in terms of cost. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the differentiation between computer use. Computer use may get super fast and super good someday. Yeah. But there's ultimately a harness around it that needs to happen in order to do these complex browser automations.
All right. Thank you so much, Jake. This was very interesting. Mm-hmm. And we learned a lot about AI in production at YC startups like CloudCruise. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Of course. Yeah. I'm happy to chat about what's next as well.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to our next episode. Where hopefully maybe you'll interview me, but let's see.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Yes. Thank you.